Hello?
Yes, Tariq. Uh,
What's up? Okay, this is another Jeff. What's up,
yes,
Jeff?
sir. I just wanted to say I'm a big fan of your content. I watched your hoodoo video. I thought there were some very good points about connecting to your ancestors and Lake Lanier and
Hmm.
all that stuff. Um,
Yes.
Obviously, you can tell I'm a white guy based on my voice. And I would like to make a small little point where you say that like media needs to differentiate between, as you call it, tethers from the Caribbean or Africa and FBAs, which I completely agree with. I would also say that I think you should do a bit of that too in regards to the way that you talk about white people, because you say that like white media and Hollywood push degeneracy on black culture, which I think is a
Don't say Jews. Don't say Jews because no, no, no. Y'all like to, this is the whole we're gonna put it on the Jews, right?
no, no, I wasn't saying it's just the Jews, but like you
Okay.
need to say that the people who run Hollywood are not the same people from Alabama and now or in the 1800s. Like these are different groups which have different motives, which I think would be a good thing to point out.
Okay, what are their motives? Because who's non racist against black people? Which one of the groups of white people are producing justice for black people?
I mean, I don't think either of them. I don't think that's the primary goal, but I would say that they
Right.
have different.
And that puts them all in the same boat right there. All of these different ethnic groups of whiteness, they all got one thing in common: anti-blackness. That's a thread throughout their whole communities. That's why we don't really differentiate between the two or the three or the four. They like to point out all of their little ethnic differences, but at the end of the day, they still operate as white. Just like slave owners, people like to play the game. Well, there were Jewish slave owners, there were Irish slave owners, there were German slave owners. All of them were slave owners, and they were brutalizing us as a group. So it's pointless to differentiate which ethnic group had the whip. The whip hurt from all of them. You understand? Same thing with these different white ethnic groups. The pain of anti-black racism, it feels the same from every last one of them. And we have to look at all of them, the white supremacists from all walks of ethnic white society, just the white supremacists, not the non-white supremacists. We have to look at them as a threat together. They're all in the same boat, and they all pose the same threat together. That makes sense.
It makes sense, but half the Jews in Hollywood, it's not just Jews, but there's a lot of Jews. Half of them don't even consider themselves white. They think of themselves as a totally different thing. And
No. Then why do they put white on their documents? All of these people who consider themselves something different, if you look at the census records, they all classify themselves as
well, that's
white.
because there's no Jewish option. But if there was a Jewish option, they would absolutely pick
Right.
that. Just because,
No, because no, because they said that with Hispanics and the white Hispanics, they say the same thing. Well, we gotta put white. Ain't no other option. Ain't no other Hispanic option. Let me tell you something. LULAC, there's an organization, one of the largest Latino American organizations in the United States. If you go to their website, they brag about forcing or campaigning the United States Census to reclassify them as white because in the 1930s, they actually gave them their own ethnic group, Mexican. That was an ethnic group. They said, no, no, no. We want to be classified as white. Lump us in with the white people. So when you see these Hispanic organizations talking about how they fought for civil rights, the civil rights they wanted was the right to be white. That's what they're not telling you. They weren't fighting for what Dr. King and Malcolm X and other people were fighting for: justice for everybody, no racial preferential treatment, none of that stuff. Justice. That's not what they were fighting for. When they were fighting for civil rights, that means we want to be civil white. So let's be very clear about history, okay?
yeah, and I do think that you and I agree that the way that I guess the Democrat Party lumps in all of these people of color, quote unquote, together is like a pretty kind of a tragedy, or maybe intentionally just trying to muddy the waters of what's really going on.
Right, right. But yeah, it is what it is. So that's why, when we see somebody practice white supremacy, it's just the same old white supremacy. They can add different flavors to it. It can be butter pecan white supremacy, chocolate chip white supremacy, pistachio white supremacy. It's still white supremacy,
Al-
whatever flavor they want to put on it.
Another question I have is if if like the current elites of America, like the people that run everything, the media, all that, if they're still like such hardcore white supremacists, why is it if you look at like the New York Times or some other big publication, there's going to be an article in there once a week about why white people should be ashamed of themselves and why like there should be less white people in college? Why would they do that?
There has never been an article like that. Not one article about how white people should be ashamed of
If I
themselves.
find one
None.
and I send it to you, will you promote it and say that there's
I
one?
will put an article right now from one of these major publications talking about how white people should be ashamed of
Ashamed of
themselves.
their history? Or
Oh, yeah.
okay.
What? Okay. How white people? We're not talking about white supremacists now. Let's be clear. White supremacists should be ashamed of their history, but a white person who's not practicing white supremacy, you're not really shamed. Your history is promoted all the time. When you look at movies and the school curriculum, I mean, shit. Hell, we look at our dollar bills, our money, our currency, our history. Well, your history, white history, is promoted all the time, every single day. When you drive down the street or go to certain cities, certain names and certain statues and monuments all over the country are white people promoting white history. They're not shaming anybody. So, yeah, that's not an incorrect assessment, sir.
I would say that I graduated from high school in 2018, and there was like a large focus on the civil rights movement. And I've
Right.
talked to people in Europe, and they say that their American history, half of it was just the 1960s, talking about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of them. And the slavery, all like slavery and how the Civil War tied into that. That's a huge part of American history that's taught to everybody. And I live in a conservative red state.
Well, yeah, the country, well, America, the history is based on anti black targeting. That's really what the country's history is based off of. What else is this country's history based off of as it relates to those in the dominant white society who believe in white
I
supremacy?
mean, I don't think like New England Puritans who run the Mayflower were like deeply committed to white supremacy. There just wasn't anybody else other than whites.
You had some of them Quakers and Pilgrims who were slave owners. Some of them were indeed slave owners. They don't get a pass. They like to act like these were some pure people who were trying to get religious freedom and all of that. Some of them were slave owners. Um, William Penn, he was a Quaker. He was a slave owner. The founder of Pennsylvania, he was a slave owner. So yeah, they're not gonna get a pass by trying to make it seem like them damn Quakers and them Pilgrims were the good guys. Nah, they had some slavery going on too. But go ahead.
I mean, the Quakers were instrumental in the Underground Railroad. Where I live in Indiana, the Quakers were massive in
Oh,
that.
oh Lord, not the white people, sir. Lord. Um, the Underground Railroad or Black people getting freedom. Most of that we were doing it on our own. They will only prop up like Harriet Tubman, who's a writer. They will prop up the handful of black people who did get help from the white church later on. That Underground Railroad thing happened later on when the North was trying to kind of destabilize the South because they didn't want the South to get too powerful. And that was what the conflict was, sir. See, we got to get this Civil War thing in order. The North were being hypocritical because the North was seeing how the South was making so much money, much more money than the northern states were making. The North, there were always rumblings about them breaking off doing their own thing. The North was trying to destabilize that to a certain degree. And the South was like, hey, what do you mean you're an abolitionist? You sold me these damn slaves because slavery started in the northern states first. The Northerners were starting it first. That was a New England enterprise at first. So the Southerners rightfully said, you guys are being hypocrites. So that's where the conflict really started. Why are you trying to destabilize us? We don't need you. Well, yes, you do, and we can't break it up. So that's where all that came from. So they weren't helping us for our own good. They saw some political leverage they could get by taking shots at the South, because when black folks went up to the North, the white people were just as brutal. There were when they were drafting people for the Civil War up in New York, the white people started attacking black people left and right. They started killing black people in the streets. Look up the New York draft riots. So yeah, we're not going to give the Northerners some kind of pass as if they were these staunch abolitionists. Also, look up the Devil's Punch Bowl, where Union soldiers sat there and murdered and slaughtered so many black people in the South after the Civil War. So we're going to get all of those stories straight. All right, but go ahead.
I mean, yeah, most of the North was incredibly racist by today's standard, but there was like a lot of Quaker abolitionists, and it wasn't majority black people running the Underground Railroad. I mean, where I live in Indiana, which was this key part of the Underground Railroad, there was probably like 100 black people in the entire state in 1850, maybe a little bit more, but
And what state? What state? What state?
Indiana,
India. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
in Indiana,
But the real
in,
the real Underground Railroad, sir, was going to the South, and this is the story that's not taught. And also, the main part of the so-called Underground Railroad was the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia and North Carolina. That was a huge maroon settlement where black people were running it on their own, and they were protecting themselves, and white people couldn't go in there. People estimate there were at least 40 to 50,000 black people living in those swamps, and white people couldn't go there at all. And that is the only place in the world where black people never took an L outside of North Sentinel Island. There's two places where black people never took an L: North Sentinel Island over there in the east, the Indian Sea, and the Great Dismal Swamp. Black people lived there in safety for centuries, and white people couldn't go in there. The brothers were militarized. They knew guerrilla warfare tactics. They were practicing hoodoo and root work. White people wouldn't dare go in there. You would get your head blown off over there. They study the Great Dismal Swamp now. That private military company, Blackwater, they set up their headquarters over there to study what foundational black Americans were doing. Also, foundational black Americans were going to Florida because Spain made Florida a state that black people who ran away could get their freedom. So brothers were going down there on their own in droves, and they ended up becoming the Black Seminoles. And the Seminole War was another thing where we turned up and we were putting that work on these white supremacists. So we got to tell the whole story. And these were a lot of black people getting down.
when did the black people in Ethiopia take an L? I'm just curious.
Where when the black people in Ethiopia did what?
When did the black people in Ethiopia take an L?
Oh, well, shit, they were taking an L when Italy annexed the place for a second. They were taking an L, and it was, you know, who went over? It was us going over there helping them out. It was foundational black Americans going over there, helping them with their Air Force, showing them how to fly planes. A brother out of Chicago went over there against the U.S.'s will. They didn't. The U.S. government didn't want us going over there. When we saw Italy was about to run up in Ethiopia, it was foundational black Americans who were lining up all over the country trying to volunteer to go over there. It was the foundational black American press and media that stayed on the bumper, putting the information out like, hey, this shouldn't happen, this shouldn't happen. We were going over there helping them, trying to get them Italians off their back. They annexed the place for a quick minute, but they ended up getting their independence. Later on, the white supremacists started to target them economically and mess up their finances. But it was foundational black Americans helping to keep the militarized Italians off their bumper. We were showing them reconnaissance, showing them how to use the planes to spy on different enemy networks. We were giving them a lot of game in that regard. But go ahead.
My final question is, what makes FBAs the most successful black people in the world, in your opinion? Because as you would say, which I think is true, black people and white people, honestly, all over the world imitate black American culture, and they take advice from them in cases like that. So what do you think it is about foundational black Americans that makes them so influential?
With us, and I use the word success lightly because, you know, we're in a global prison, so you can only be as successful as, you know, success is relative. That's like who's the most successful person in prison. But influence wise, I think we're influential because no one on the planet has gone through what foundational Black Americans have gone through. Nobody, where you have been generationally enslaved to the point where an ethnic group tried to erase everything from you, and then you created a counterculture that was even more dominant and influential. Nothing like that has ever happened, where these people were selling our children. We were, by law, um, determined to be raped, mutilated, violated with no sanctuary. We had zero help from anybody. We had to get it out the mud. No one was forced to build a country from scratch and didn't flee. You stayed 10 toes down. Nobody has ever stood up to this type of oppression. Nobody has been oppressed like this, and nobody has stood up to it. Most people fold for less than what happened to us. And that's what makes people look at us. That's what makes the foundational Black American man the epitome of masculinity. Because you got these other groups, let's keep it a buck, from other countries. The minute a little food dry up, all of a sudden they're at the immigration office getting a hand job trying to bounce. Us, we done been through all types of stuff. We know how to get it out the damn mud. You leave a foundational Black American somewhere by himself in the woods, you come back a year later, he has a Black Wall Street. We did that in Oklahoma. The white supremacists left us alone in Oklahoma. They didn't want to mess with us. They said, hey, go on over there on that side. Go to one of them Indian reservations. They came back some years later. They saw a bunch of Black millionaires. That's why they had to burn the shit down. We know how to get shit popping without waiting on the dominant society to do it. And they know that. In the Bronx, I'm doing a hip hop documentary. They left the Bronx in rubbles. They left that place a wasteland. Our brothers and sisters said, hey, we're going to take some of the culture that we got living in the South that we brought up here to the Bronx, not from the Caribbean. Let's stop that bullshit. But we had Southern culture that we were utilizing up there, the rhyming, the dancing, the appreciation of funk music, all that stuff. And we put it all together and created a whole new music genre, which is hip hop. So that's the thing. We know how to get things from the mud and create something from nothing.
If there was an immigration moratorium bill coming through Congress, would you support that bill?
It depends on, give me an example of what you, like an example of what would be the basis of it.
You mean like what would be the motivation?
Right. What would be the outcome of the bill? What is, like? Yeah, I got to have a more clear example. What would be the outcome of the
I
bill?
mean, you could argue against it from economic standpoint. You could argue against it from a cultural standpoint. It would. I mean, I assume that the people that would do it through an economic argument, but I would support it more for cultural reasons, I guess. Um, but I would think that'd be something you'd be
But
completely in favor.
but you gotta explain, because they have informal immigration proclamations. Basically, right now, when we see all of these people coming over illegal, that's informal. They're being allowed to come over here. Let's be clear. They're not sneaking around. No, they're being allowed. You go to the border, they're opening the doors for these people. So when you are talking about having an immigration bill or whatever, you got to be very specific. Them backdooring a bunch of people over here, no, that's not cool, which is what they're doing, because that chips away at our finances, and they're giving our tax dollars to these people that they're letting in the back door. You go to New York and they got people all in hotels and they're giving them monthly little stipends. These are our tax dollars. I'm not with that at all. So yeah.
Yeah, and then they replaced the nail salons in black neighborhoods with Mexican restaurants.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm all about our reparations. How do you feel about reparations? Do you think foundational Black Americans should get reparations?
We talked about this like a year ago, and I disagree with it. Although I would probably support it if I was you.
If you were what?
If I was black, I would probably support it, but I'm opposed to it.
Now, why are you opposed to a justice claim for something that's owed?
Well, first of all, you can make an reparations argument about any number of groups. Like, if if I was a Southerner, I could say, "Can I get reparations from the North because they pillaged all my wealth?" You could absolutely make a really.
Which they got. Which they got.
When did they get
Which
that?
they got. They
They're
did get it.
before the Civil War, they were the richest
Which they
region,
got.
and now they're the poorest region.
Sir, they got reparations. They got papered up. The Reconstruction, they rebuild the South. They were giving them white plantation owners their money. They were giving them tax dollars. They paid them for the loss of property, the loss of slaves. They got paid. Not only that, there was a white woman up until about 3 years ago. She just died. She was getting a Civil War pension because her dad fought in the Civil War. They were still giving white people Civil War pensions up until about 3 or 4 years ago. Y'all look that up. So, yeah, they were already getting money. Even to this day, the descendants of those people were getting
It
money.
probably wasn't her dad. It was probably her husband, because there was a practice of young ladies in the South in like the 1920s marrying like really elderly Civil War veterans, and in the 1930s and 40s, because it basically sets you up for the rest of your life. So I would assume it's probably her ex-husband.
No, it was the daughter because her dad was old when he had her, and she was old as hell. So it was the
Well,
daughter. It was her.
but
It was the
I
daughter.
think
Yeah.
there's still cases of women that are still receiving Civil War pensions through their ex-husbands because they were born in like 1920, and then they married a really elderly guy in like 1939, and then
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's possible too. But yeah, in this case in particular, it was a descendant of one of those guys, and she was still getting the damn check. So yeah, we need to get some of them damn checks too.
Well, but
Now
that's not reparations. I mean, that makes a little bit of difference, but the wealth in the South is radically different pre-Civil War and post-Civil War, and it still hasn't recovered to this day.
sir, the United States, man, the wealth in this country, the South is a part of the United States. The South is not its own separate country. They share in all of the tax benefits. They get all the tax set asides. So they have the same power economically as the rest of the country. And we need to get compensated for the enslavement and the economic deprivation that happened to us that was never compensated. That would be the just thing to do, right?
I mean, you said that the South has the same economic opportunities as the North, which is true. But couldn't you say then that Black Americans have the same economic opportunities as a group that white people or Hispanics or Asians have?
How so? How? When we have systematic white supremacy that's been proven over and over again.
Are you talking about, like, what do you mean by systematic white supremacy? Are you talking about like prisons or loans or what?
No, and all across the board. There's name one area in our society that's not dominated by white supremacy. Just one.
I would say schools.
Sir, schools for Florida, for example, right now they're getting Black history out of schools right now down in Florida where you can't teach it. In Texas, they're doing the same thing. The school books are being flipped all over the country where they won't even teach Black history. They are taking it out of the school system. Right now, they have these white think tanks running around the country talking about CRT. It's a made up boogeyman that's basically an anti Black edict. This is happening all over the country. That's white supremacy right there, where Black students and a Black curriculum is being attacked all over the country under these little coded words like CRT and all of this stuff. That's white supremacy. So it's dominated by white supremacy. The school system, and also school systems are affected by tax dollars. Black school systems don't get the same resources as white schools, and they do that based on geographic location and allocation of tax dollars. So we get limited resources for Black schools. So we get a poorer education simply because we were born the wrong race according to the dominant society.
That's true that Black schools do have. Actually, that's not entirely true. I mean, I'm going to mention my state again, but the highest funded school district in my state per capita is Indianapolis Public Schools, which I think besides Gary has the second highest Black population. And I think Gary is literally number two. Granted, a lot of that money is used for like buildings because there's a lot of buildings that they have to have. And
Right.
but they still are making more money per student because there's been a push to fund those inner city Black schools. And
No, it's the infrastructure, but not the curriculum, sir. It doesn't trickle down. So they'll make the neighborhood look nice, just like they'll make a prison look nice. It doesn't help the inmates. So that money is not going into the educational curriculum. It's not there. So yeah, That money is for infrastructure. That money is probably to get new buses, stuff like that. It's to help out some of the teachers, the principals, the school board. Many of them get money allocated to them, but it doesn't really trickle down to the black students at all. But go ahead.
Also, in Florida with Ron DeSantis, when he took out the AP Black History, I think, course or whatever, but he emphasized in his uh, presser about that thing that he says we're still going to teach a lot of Black history in like general world or U.S. history and all that stuff. So he said that they're still teaching it. Um,
But no, 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 because they just got PragerU, and PragerU is a white supremacist think tank. They're going to have PragerU allocate some of the curriculum. PragerU and Dennis Prager and these guys, that's a hardcore suspected white supremacist entity. And they're going to be in charge or have anything to do with the educational system. This is why, yeah, they're going to teach black history, but they're going to teach that we benefited from slavery. That's what the whole argument is. They're going to start teaching that it wasn't so bad. They're going to start teaching, well, hell, Harriet Tubman, she kind of liked the whippings. They're going to start teaching, like, well, Frederick Douglass, he didn't think the ass whoopings were that bad. So that's the con game, see?
how is Dennis Prager a white supremacist?
Oh, stop. PragerU, everything about them is anti black rhetoric. Everything about them is to justify harming black people. And what they do, they hire a bunch of tethers to do the dirty work for them. They're always hiring a Candace Owen or some Caribbean tether, some Nigerian tether to go out here and speak and spew their lines about how racism ain't that bad and black on black crime. They pay black folks to spew white supremacy for them. They're worse than the Klan. But go ahead.
With Can, I don't agree that Prager is worse than the Klan, but with Candace Owens, you mentioned it in one of your videos, and I looked it up. But she's, I think, half FBA.
But she's an anchor baby if she's half FBA because she brags about being Caribbean and she's um, spoken very negatively about foundational black Americans. So she identifies as a Caribbean. And if she is so called half FBA, she shouldn't be the representative. And we don't look at her as a representative of foundational black Americans because she has dual allegiances. That's why people with dual allegiances can't speak up for our issues because there's a conflict of interest. They will elevate their Caribbean side or their African side, and they'll have contempt for the foundational black American side that they latched onto and tethered onto. That's what a parasite does. So she's not our representative. That's why Dennis Prager and these other people from these white supremacist think tanks, they know to get the anchor babies and the tethers because they understand that they're not going to have the same spirit as a foundational black American. Our spirit is different. We have a spirit of resistance. We have a spirit and a history of fighting against these white supremacists because innately we know that they're wrong. And historically, we've always fought against them. Even in death, our spirit still fights against these white supremacists. Look at Lake Lanier. The spirit of them people are still whooping ass up there in Forsyth County. They're not even here no more, but their spirit still whooping ass and taking names. See, they know we got that kind of spirit. So that's why they know when they want somebody to do the dirty work for them, go get a tether.
I agree with you that that's a problem, and that's why I think it's funny how the elites in America use people like JFK, who is an Ellis Islander, and most of the American elites at this point are Ellis Islanders. They're not FWAs. So it is
What? They're not what? Go ahead.
FWAs.
What's that?
It's a foundational white Americans.
Okay. I thought it was funky white ass because that's it's not really foundational.
Unseasoned
It didn't really.
Americans.
No, yeah, yeah. Fentanyl white Americans, but yeah, foundational. Y'all weren't really foundational because we were doing all the building. We were the foundation. Yeah.
You want to know something?
Floating a floating white American because you floated over a boat to get all of the benefits from the foundational black Americans. So,
Tariq,
but
I
go
have to
ahead.
give Black Americans credit. I posted a map the other day of the states that consume meth the most and have the most meth labs,
Mm-hmm.
and there was like an inverse correlation between meth consumption and like black population. So that's not
Oh,
really your thing.
Sir, we don't do
No,
meth
I'm
like
saying it's
that.
opposite. I'm saying the more black it is, the less meth people consume.
Oh, I get. Okay, okay, got. Okay, okay. I'm about to say. Oh, I was okay. There you go. Okay, there. Okay, I was about to say. I'm like, dude, we do not do no
I was
meth.
giving you
No.
credit because people are like, "Why is
Okay.
Mississippi so low?" I'm like, "It's pretty obvious. Black people just aren't into meth."
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We ain't into that shit. You know, we like some weed. We'll smoke some bomb ass weed. That's good enough for most of us. Sometimes a few black folks will hit some cocaine, which is some new shit. But yeah, we're weed heads. We'll stick to the weed. We don't do all that meth, because it takes you out of there.
Uh,
But
all
anyway,
right,
man,
yeah, Tariq, I'm gonna go. I appreciate talking to you, big fan. Don't put a root out on me for saying I oppose reparations, and
you're gonna, you're gonna be good. We're not gonna spike the tuna casserole. We're not gonna do
thank
it.
you,
We're gonna
thank you,
be fine.
thank you.
All right, Jeff. I appreciate you. Thank you, bro. All right. That's Jeff. All right. That's funny. Not the FWA if you don't stop. If you don't stop. Hold on. Let me get my brother Terrain in here. Let's get Terrain. If Jeff don't stop. What's up, brother Terrain? Just turn your microphone on.
Hey, Tariq, what's good?
I'm good, man. How are you, brother?
Maintaining, man, staying out this heat, man. I'm down in Atlanta.
Oh, wow. Wow. How's everything going down there?
Everything is good, man. There's a lot of stuff going on politically, man. They got a whole barricade around the courthouse in case these Trump indictments come down. But um,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk with you about the subject of the space today about Lizzo being in hot water for degenerate behavior. And
Yeah.
I think you know this, and some of the people in the room know this. My background is in media and in messaging and imagery. And
Yeah.
my thing about Lizzo, because these allegations are still unproven, but my point is this: every culture has some form of degeneracy in it. White people have porn stars. Every culture has that. The issue with Black Americans is that our degenerates have the biggest microphones and the biggest megaphones, and they get the most airtime.
Yeah.
That's part of the issue.
Yes.
There's always been Lizzos in the community. There's always been Sukiyana, people like that in the community, but they were always ostracized and they were always either told to get the hell out of the neighborhood or stop doing that wild out stuff. And even in music, there's always been that. The issue, like I said, now is that you don't have enough variety in entertainment to be able to differentiate between the ratchet shit and the stuff and the people who are doing other stuff. Like, you're a little bit older. We had the Two Live Crew, but we also had Public Enemy. We had NWA, but you also had Ice-T. You always had these different dichotomies going on in music and entertainment. Now everything's all ratchet and it's all trick music, and that's what we're dealing with. It's crazy.
Yeah. Real talk, man. And again, every group, they have an underclass, an underbelly. That's why FBA family, don't let nobody come over here pointing their finger to us, talking about what's up with them niggas in Chicago or what's up with your cult. No, don't let them play that game. Because when you go to wherever they're from, there's degeneracy all around. They just don't have $1 million or $1 billion budget from a corporation elevating that and promoting it all over the media. They just don't have it. We're the only group that has that, the underclass. When you go over to Asian countries, don't let people run the model minority jazz. You go to some of these Asian countries, they got hostros, broad daylight. That's like a super highway of hostros in some of these countries. You go to some of these countries, there's people living on rivers with sewers, open defecation. It's a hellhole in some of these places. You go places in India, there's bodies floating up and down the street. Nobody can come over here and point their finger to us about anything. And don't let anybody shame you. We just get the Sukihanas and the sexy reds and the Lizzos promoted to us every single day as if that's a normalized part of our culture. And it is not. We are the only group that have minstrels promoted as normal, and that's been this way since the 1800s. The first form of entertainment in the United States were minstrel shows, them making caricatures of black people for the entertainment of white people. The Sukihanas and the Lizzos and all of these people, that's for white people's consumption. You don't see black people at a Lizzo concert. Okay? You don't see black folks trying to go see the Little Nas X's. None of that stuff. All of that degenerate stuff, white people love that. They love that type of nonsense because that makes them feel comfortable within the stereotypes. Yeah? So we have to be very clear on that. And this is why it's very important for us to control our images and our media and have a media that um, we can dictate. That's why independent medias are very, very important. And this is also why, again, they're getting in hip hop now. Let's be real. With hip hop, a lot of the people out now, a lot of them are tethers. Let's keep it a buck. We got a couple of a handful of FBAs, but yeah, most of the people now with all of the degenerate stuff, they're tethers. Most of these people with these weird Southern accents, especially down in Florida, these are not FBAs. I've talked about this many, many times. These the mumble rap crews, when you look in their background, they're not even FBAs. I've said this before as a person who lived in the South as a child. I lived in the South. I lived in the heart of the South. I lived in Alabama. Black people in the 70s and 80s in Alabama weren't talking like, man, get the thing out there, shout it, got down, get this thing, I'm about to get crunk in this bitch, shout it. They weren't really talking like that. Black people were not talking like that in the South. That kind of started in the 90s, that mumbling ass buffoon talk. Go look at interviews from the 60s. Go look at some of the Selma interviews and the civil rights protest videos. Notice everybody was articulate. Our black parents, the black people in the 60s, when they talked, they were very articulate in the South. They weren't mumbling and doing all that old plantation gibber jab. They weren't doing that. That stuff, we started hearing that weird ass talk in the 90s from tethers who were trying to emulate a Southern accent. They were mixing their foreign accent with a Southern accent. Then it just started sounding weird. You hear a lot of that in Florida. Not that I'm not denigrating Florida, but a lot of these weird accents, that those are immigrant accents trying to sound Southern, just like Kodak Black. Yeah, those are immigrants trying to talk with a Southern slang. We can tell. You know, if you grow up in a certain environment, you can tell somebody who's from the soil, and you can tell somebody who's different. You can tell. Yeah, it's a real interesting dynamic. All right. We got a lot of folks in here. What's up, Nikki the God? I see you. And by the way, guys, get your root work package. Some of you should have it already. Rootworkstyle.com. Rootworkstyle.com. That's where you can get the root work package, the new deodorant based on our foundational Black American culture of root work. That's what we were doing, ladies and gentlemen. We were practicing root work, which was a healing system. And they had to stop that. A lot of us, and I did a whole broadcast about this the other day, how Black people, foundational Black Americans, we were using hoodoo and root work to heal each other, to empower each other, to protect each other. And it was working. And people in the dominant white society were coming to us for healing. And they saw how much money we were making and how successful we were. They had to break that up. So they had to start with the you can't practice medicine without a license. You can't say you heal people if you don't go through us. We got a new thing called the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So if you go out here talking about healing people, we're going to fine you, we're going to lock you up. You understand? They don't lock you up if they're not threatened. And they start locking up root work practitioners, Black people who are root workers. They started locking us up. They started putting fines on us. That's what Dr. Sebi, remember, he went to jail and died down there in Mexico. They never, you notice they never explained why they put Dr. Sebi in jail. Why did they put Dr. Sebi in jail? They never gave an explanation. They had him hemmed up. He had some money on him. They put him in jail. Then he died. They never explained none of that stuff. It's still a mystery to this day. All right. Let me see.